Hi everyone, and thanks so much for joining today's event. My name is Zezhen. I'm a behavioral scientist at the Agency Fund. I hope you've enjoyed the short film that introduces the four-level evaluation framework. And if you're new to the playbook, here's where everything lives. This is a living site designed for the development sector, and we update it continuously as new tools, evidence, and use cases emerge. I encourage you to explore it after the session, not because you will find every answer there yet, but because it provides a shared language that's already helping partners collaborate across technical, research, and product teams. We've also recently published an updated informational slide deck for the playbook, created with collaborators at ID Insight and Center for Global Development. And in today's presentation, rather than going too deep into the playbook itself, I'd like to discuss the still open questions that we need support from all of you to answer. And before diving into these open questions, let me briefly orient us to the four-level framework you saw in the film. In level 1, we care about model evaluation. We ask the question, does the AI model produce the desired responses? And this usually involves AI engineers and domain experts working together on iterating on models, knowledge base, prompts, evaluation databases, and benchmark metrics. And if we decide that AI performs well against general and context-specific benchmarks, we move on to level 2, where we ask the question, does the product facilitate meaningful interactions? And this usually involves product managers and data scientists working together on how the product as the whole or features of the product influence things like users' engagement, retention, and non-engagement metrics. And if targeted users use and engage in the AI product at a satisfactory rate, we move on to level 3, which is user evaluation. Does the product positively support user thoughts, feelings, knowledge, and behaviors? And this usually involves psychologists, UX researchers, and data scientists working together, experimenting on how the product as a whole or the features of the product influence users' proximal, psychological, and behavioral metrics, which are hopefully predictive of the longer-term developmental outcomes. And as you notice here, this is a constant feedback loop with later stages feeding back to earlier stages. And our idea is that this is a living organism, a living machine of evaluation, constantly generating evidence and data that informs product design and informs team decision. And if there is consistent success in level 1 to level 3 evaluations, we may need to move on to impact evaluation. Does the access to the product improve human development outcomes? And this usually involves policy researchers, data scientists, economists, AI engineers working all together, assessing the impact of the product on users' distal developmental outcomes. And as you notice here, the implication is that the earlier stages or levels, they have lower cost, risk, and time spent, but the later stages, they have relatively higher cost, risk, and time spent. And after producing this framework, we've talked to many researchers, practitioners, and even funders about what they believe are the still open questions, and I'd like to run through some key questions with you today. So in level 1, model evaluation, the main question that people always mention to me is that what are the minimal standards? By minimal standards, I mean what are the non-negotiable baseline criteria every AI system must meet? Things like safety, bias, correctness, accuracy, so on and so forth. And how should these standards differ by sector or use case or user profiles? And more specifically about AI safety, which is something that everyone cares about, how should models be tested to ensure they do not enable self-harm, violence, abuse, or illegal content? How should safety metrics be culturally adapted, especially for vulnerable populations? When must teams conduct formal red teaming, and when is it strongly recommended? And finally, is it possible to build a public repository of questions AI should never answer in different contexts? And when we talk about creating goldens or benchmarks, we ask, how do we involve domain experts in creating the goldens? And when you look at all the technical tools that enable evaluation, model evaluation in the market, we realize a lot of these tools are engineer-oriented. It is very difficult for a domain expert to contribute in a very intuitive way, right? So how do we involve these domain experts who have very limited technical experience, but a lot of domain-specific knowledge? And how do we balance human-generated and AI-generated goldens? And how should systems transition between them? What should be elicited from users when constructing Goldens? How should we weight users' feedback versus experts' feedback versus AI's feedback? And how do we ensure that edge cases, which are not represented but are very important, are actually well represented in an evaluation system? And finally, as people develop more and more complex AI tools, rather than just RAG chatbots, we ask questions like, how does the evaluation rubric change for agentic systems with tool use? How can we pragmatically evaluate multi-model systems, which are harder to benchmark consistently? And how should performance be assessed in evolving agentic workflows, which usually involve multi-turn conversations and multi-model conversations, rather than single-turn responses? And moving on to level 2 product evaluation. What are good level 2 metrics? Are engagement metrics actually predictive of high level 3 and level 4 outcomes? How do we choose or standardize meaningful metrics across contexts or domains? And are our current metrics gameable, biased, or misleading? And what counts as good enough performance for core measures at level 2? And in terms of evaluation itself, we need a lot of experiments, especially A/B testing, right? What consent, guardrails, or ethical considerations are required for A/B test or adaptive tests? And how do we minimize harm, manage risk, and determine minimum effect dosage for these AI products? And how do we choose among fixed horizon tests, sequential testing, multi-M bandits, contextual bandits, or alternatives? And when is experimentation worth the cost versus launching directly? And moving on to level 3, user evaluation. We care about the behavioral proxies that are hopefully predictive of the longer-term developmental outcomes. But what are the constraints in measuring these behavior and behavioral proxies through short self-report surveys without disrupting the AI and human conversation too much, right? Do we embed it inside, in the middle of a conversation? Do we test it at the end of a conversation, right? So, like, what are the right surveys to administer if you only have room for 1 or 2 items? What can log data tell us about user behavior? Are these good proxies, right, of these behavioral changes? And how do we construct behavioral proxies for longer-term developmental outcomes? And for every behavior, we believe there is at least one behavioral determinant. And for every behavioral determinant, we believe that there must be some kind of psychological process or mechanism behind it. So how do we validly and reliably measure these latent, unobserved psychological constructs from things like conversational traces, right? Let's say we want to measure users' agency, which is their capability to develop goals, set goals, navigate goals, and be resilient about their goals despite the difficulties. Can we reliably detect these kind of agency through conversations? Can we develop consistent quantitative metrics for agency, right? And how do we bridge traditional psychological measurement with computational LLM-based methods? So traditionally, psychologists use longer surveys to measure things like agency, which is really hard to measure because it is unobserved and it is highly multidimensional. But with LLMs, it is possible to train an AI, tell it what agency looks like in conversation, and maybe you'll be able to score things like agents more consistently. But this is a really open area of research. And finally, how can AI systems be intentionally designed to cultivate user agency and psychologically meaningful engagement? So this is an intervention development question rather than an evaluation question, but we believe that to induce agency, to actually meaningfully measure agency, we do need the activities or like the AI interactions itself be agentic. So I've always been advocating that agentic AI should be designed with the user's agency in mind instead of just having AI automating what the users want to automate. But how do we design these activities, right? For farmers, for patients, for students, and how do we measure agency as a result? So these are all open questions. And moving on to level 4, impact evaluation. What is treatment and what is control in this context? How can trials stay valid when the AI treatment keeps changing? How should trials handle model updates, define what counts as a material change or log version data reliably? Should studies use frozen versions, rolling releases, or hybrid designs, and which designs separate version effects from learning or adoption effects? How do we ensure results are reproducible and generalizable when the underlying AI evolves very fast during the trial? And how can the trial stay valid when people in the control group actually use other AI tools? Would it dilute the treatment effect? How should we control for that? How should we be careful designing an experiment that actually detects the effect of the NGO's AI tools? And how can we make impact evaluations faster and more efficient without losing rigor? Which design innovations like adaptive trials, sequential design, step wedges can shorten timelines while preserving credibility? What data innovations can accelerate measurement? And what can AI itself augment evaluation tasks? And what accuracy and privacy risks remain? So hopefully I didn't overwhelm you too much with this long laundry list of unanswered questions. And to close, let me offer one caveat and one invitation. So the caveat is that we do not yet have complete answers to many of these questions, and we suspect that a top-down approach is not enough. It needs to be heavily accompanied by a bottom-up approach. But we increasingly believe the answers will emerge from actually implementing the four-level framework in your real product context across many organizations, contexts, and sectors. And the invitation is your perspectives matter. This framework is not designed to centralize control or dictate a single way to do evaluation. Instead, it is meant to help people from very different backgrounds, engineers, economists, psychologists, product people, trying to understand how each other's work fits together in a coherent evaluation system. And our hope is that together we can build a shared evaluation practice that is rigorous enough to protect users, flexible enough to handle fast-moving technology, and grounded enough to actually improve people's lives. So please fill out the form to contribute to the playbook, and thank you so much for your attention.